everyone, welcome to the December 6th edition of the TimeformUS Pacecast. I'm David Aragona. Will not be joined by my usual co-host Craig Milkowski today. Craig has a vacation coming up for most of December, so he'll be joining me for one more podcast on Friday when we do the forecast. We'll do some handicapping for the weekend, but we're giving Craig an early start on his vacation today. I do have a special guest filling in for Craig, though, to join me. The focus of this podcast is going to be recapping Cigar Mile Day, so who better to come on to help me do this recap than New York Racing Association handicapper Andy Serling. Andy, welcome back to the podcast.
Thanks. You know, I'm on vacation too. I don't know why Craig's vacation gets precedence over mine. I'm going to have to give him a call.
Yeah, Andy
I'm happy to talk about that. For you and, for Craig who's giving so much to horse days, I'll do anything for Craig.
Yeah, I know Andy's off for the rest of the month, and try not to make him do too much extra work here, but I know that you already took in all these races, so I'm sure it's not too much skin off your back to do a little bit of recapping, because this is such a fun day to talk about. And I was personally kind of disappointed after Cigar Mile Day last year, because it was just kind of an unsatisfying Cigar Mile. A lot of the top horses decided to skip it. The favorite didn't really show up. I mean, it was a cool story with Kendrick Carmouche winning and True Timber, the long shot, taking that race, but I thought that this year's Cigar Mile, I mean, even when the card was drawn, it just really lived up to what this race is supposed to be. Some interesting turnbacks, older horses, 3-year-olds stepping up to face those, getting that class test. And on the racetrack, it really did kind of live up to that billing.
Yeah, and I think it's a window into something that's not overly surprising to a lot of people, that the 3-year-olds are better than the older horses. We saw. Not only was it overall a pretty weak year for older horses, and not, obviously Nick's Go was good, and there's some bright spots out there, but from a depth standpoint, it was a pretty mediocre year, and not the case for 3-year-olds. There's a lot of really good 3-year-olds around, so I guess in retrospect, it's not that surprising that 3-year-olds dominated this race. I guess I should have thought about that before picking older horses as my 1-2 picks in there. But certainly a good day for Todd Pletcher. And yeah, I mean, it's funny with Cigar Mile. I think it was disappointing when I first saw the final time that it was slower than the Go for Juan. But at the end of the day, the Go for Juan, from a speed figure standpoint, was as big a figure, as you could imagine. And I think the Cigar Mile, which got a 104 buyer, I don't know what number Craig gave it, but I imagine he probably gave it a strong number. And I think it comes out. There's a lot to look forward to from those horses going forward.
Yeah, I mean, discussing the times of the two races, and we'll get to the Go for Juan in a little bit, the one biggest difference, I think, was the pace between the two. The Cigar Mile featured a more competitive pace. They went 0.5 seconds faster to the half mile. They went 1.2 seconds faster to the 6 furlong mark. So they really did kind of heat up the pace around the far turn in the Cigar, whereas Lady Rocket got kind of a breather at that point. So if you're looking at Craig's numbers, Craig did give the TimeformUS speed figure for the Cigar a 128. Lady Rocket got a 125. Again, we'll get to Lady Rocket in a little bit, but American Revolution, and especially following C, who did get the highest TimeformUS speed figure of the day, getting a 130 in the Cigar Mile, they both got a pace upgrade because of those faster middle fractions. And they were the 2 3-year-olds that you were referencing that really did step up in this race. American Revolution, a horse that kind of was on nobody's radar during the summer, but it's just amazing the way that he's improved with leaps and bounds with every start for Todd.
Well, he was such an interesting horse when he showed up at Belmont in that maiden race, which I think was pretty close to Saratoga, because I had never seen his debut, or I remember his debut because I remember Mandaloun winning it. But when he showed up, I remember watching it and thinking, geez, if this horse hadn't been unlucky, he might have beaten Mandaloun that day. And I think we talked about it. I'm sure we both probably referenced the fact that this was a kind of unusually good New York bred, that race. I remember there being some goofy idea, interesting horses in the race, but thinking, this might be the kind of New York bred that is a little bit better than what you normally expect to see in those races. Now, obviously, somebody said to me, yeah, he's going to win the Cigar Mile. I said, probably not that good a New York bred, or any that good a horse, period. But he's really developed for Todd Pletcher. I think the thing I like about him is he does seem like a horse that probably going to do very well going longer, but he's not a slow plotter. He can adapt to circumstances, and he's won at 6 and a mile and 1 8. He's a very promising horse going into next year.
Yeah, and I know connections can get somewhat distance obsessed with these horses, kind of pigeonholing them into being a two-turn horse or only
Right.
excelling at a specific distance. But he's a great example of why we like horses like this that are turning back in distance in races like the Cigar, because they do get those faster paces and they can adapt to them. And American Revolution in particular, he's one of these Pletcher horses that he doesn't always take you there on his own, and I think Louis Saez is a great fit for him because he's the kind of horse that does take a lot of pedaling, a lot of riding, and you could see when they were coming around the far turn in the Cigar, and Ginobili started really exerting a lot of pressure on following C on the front end, and the entire field kind of came off the bridle at that point, and you could see kind of passing the half-mile pole, Saez had to really get into American Revolution at that point just to hold his position in the middle of the pack. But I think it's a credit to him that he was able to respond to that pressure and then again produce another kick once he got into the clear into the stretch. Just a really cool horse and great for a rider to know that he has all those gears to use.
Yeah, I wonder if when they get to longer races, whether it's a mile and eighth and a race like the Whitney or those, and we certainly hope he gets there, can they relax a little bit more and let him make his run? Like, you think of a race like the Albany, when he finally sort of got those gears going, how he kicked in, but no reason to believe that Todd Pletcher, I have to imagine he's thinking of the race formerly known as the Don. Obviously he's running Life is Good is there. So, is he going to go? I guess it's up to the connections if they want to go, but it's similar connections, right? They're both WinStar horses, I think.
Both WinStar, I think China Horse Club too.
It'll be interesting to see. They're sort of different running style horses, so they're not the worst complementary duo. And it's not like American Revolution finishing second would it be a terrible thing, because I don't care what anybody says. Nixgo's not running in there if Life is Good shows up. But I imagine that their probably biggest goal after a series of those races, they have to be thinking about races like the Met Mile.
Yeah, I saw
great ones.
Yeah, I saw Pletcher kind of hinting at the fact that while they were going to consider the Pegasus, maybe it was more likely that they were going to rest him up right now and point to some of those races you were referencing during the summer and fall. Personally, I don't know that I necessarily see the upside to making the Pegasus a big goal, unless you're going for some of those big races in the Middle East, like the Saudi Cup or the Dubai World Cup, which I always kind of pray that horses like American Revolution are not going to run in, because it means that we get to see them a lot less in this country later in the year. Usually those horses require a bit of a layoff after that. But Pletcher's not hinting at any of that. I don't think it's a big downside that they give him a bit of a rest now, because he is the kind of horse that they're going to be looking at the Breeders' Cup Classic with. And you want to see that kind of horse put together a full 4-year-old campaign, because he seems like a perfect candidate to really be a nice 4-year-old next year.
I agree. And I know that people, they're always saying, this horse should run more. Well, American Revolution ran 6 races in 5 months. That's a lot. That's a lot for any horse. So I don't see any reason to rush him along. And I imagine Todd will, probably want to, go along slowly. It's a big year next year, a lot of big races.
Now, obviously, Todd could not have asked for much more from his two charges at the Cigar Mile, as Following C also ran a huge race. The question with him going in, kind of like American Revolution, but from the other end of the spectrum, was the distance, because he was stretching out. And I would talk to you about this a little bit beforehand. He's the kind of horse that they had rushed along a little bit at the start, trying the distance in the Haskell, which I think we all recognized at the time was a little bit too ambitious of a spot for him. They have been a little bit aggressive with him, trying to get that grade 1, him being the son of Run Happy. But he's a really talented horse who I think is turning out to be more versatile than maybe some people gave him credit for early in his career.
Yeah, and I think you and I are often skeptical of trainers speak, but there are trainers that will say things that we do respect. And when Todd Pletcher said, I know he ran poorly in the Haskell, or, sort of, paraphrasing, but I don't think that's a real indication of his abilities to go a little bit longer. I respect that. Todd's not a dope. Todd's not a guy who's putting horses in. Listen, sometimes you have to eat a little bit for owners, but I just don't see Todd in that situation. If he really strongly said, you know what, we made a mistake in the Haskell, this is a 6 furlong to 7 furlong type horse, he wouldn't have run him in here. He didn't need to run last in here and embarrass himself situation. So I'm not surprised that he ran well in there. And I think he really did run well, because he didn't break super sharply. It's a little bit exaggerated when you watch, the inside horses, but he broke probably a half length slow, which matters when you just get beaten in a race like this. And, and while the pace, heated up a bit, I don't think it was an excruciating pace, but I think that third quarter was pretty strong. And that's when the race separated itself from the Go for Wand. And look, whatever you think of Ginobili, he was dealing with Following C, and Following C buried Ginobili in the race.
Yeah, I was impressed by that performance. He kicked on and fought at the top of the stretch, whereas Ginobili kind of caved in at that point when he received some pressure. I mean, the other horses, I think that they were a cut below the top two. Plainsman ran decently for third. I know there was an inquiry after the race. I thought he was always finishing third, even though he might have been a little bit closer if not for that trouble. I thought Olympiad actually ran okay for fourth. Watching the race, I think IRAD almost underestimated how much horse he had coming around the far turn because, as you said, Ginobili kind of really went at it with following C at that point, and everybody came off the bridle. And I think maybe Olympiad, if he had been ridden a little bit harder, could have gotten closer at the end. But I mean, he's another 3-year-old that I thought stepped up and confirmed some of those speed figures that he had run against weaker company coming into this race. So just yet another horse that I think is going to be an exciting one for next year. Some of the older horses like Code of Honor, Ginobili, Independence Hall, they just didn't really get back to the better efforts that you would have been hoping for here.
Yeah, I like Code of Honor, and you know what? He didn't really run that well in the air. I think Code of Honor is one of these horses that people need to remember when they whine about horses being retired after their 3-year-old year. There's a risk for connections and leaving horses in training. The reality is the Code of Honor would be more valuable as a stallion had he retired at the end of his 3-year-old year. Not to say he doesn't have value as a stallion, and I think he's an interesting horse, but it's not always as simple as they're just retiring them for money. There's a reason sometimes, and sometimes because they don't really go on with it. And Code of Honor, while he ran some good races at 4, I thought his Met was very good. He ran third, but nobody's getting any real credit for running third with a bad, race dynamic setup. I don't think he badly disvalued himself, but I think he was a sexier sire had they retired him after 3. So give them credit for leaving him in training, and remember that the next time you whine about a horse being retired early, which I'll do too. I'll whine about it too. I did it about Essential Quality. I think it sucks to be retired.
No, I think it's a good point. I mean, I think it helps when you're sired by Noble Mission, and maybe, as you said, you're not going to be a sought-after stallion, so you do kind of have that option to leave the horse in training. But at the end of the day, it's almost as if, from a value standpoint, Code of Honor kind of came away empty-handed from his 4-year-old and 5-year-old seasons, just didn't have anything, as you said, that really added to the value. I think that wraps up the cigar. Let's move on before we get to the 2-year-old races to talk about that other race that went as a graded stakes at the 1-turn mile, the Gopher Wand. And Andy, this was kind of the breakout performance of the day from Lady Rocket. I know that some of us were skeptical about her getting the distance. I was listening to some of Maggie Wolfendale's paddock report. Even she was saying that physically Lady Rocket didn't necessarily look like a horse that was supposed to relish the mile, but boy, she had no trouble doing it on the track. It did help that she didn't receive that much pace pressure up front, but I mean, the other horses in this field were just not in the same league as her, and this definitely opens up a whole new set of options for her connections next year.
Yeah, I mean, I'll touch on that for a second because I actually did text with Brad Cox about it, but yeah, I was overwhelmed. I picked her second, but I used a bunch of horses in the Big Six here. I didn't have any confidence in her getting the mile and running this race. And my gosh, I mean, this was, I know Brad Cox lost a good horse in Monomoy Girl this year. Well, she may not be Monomoy Girl, but Monomoy Girl also never ran a 106 Flyer, to be fair. And I'm not saying that Lady Rocket is better than Monomoy Girl, but we're talking about horses now. 11 starts, 6 wins, 3 seconds, and a third. So very quietly, a horse that debuted late in Saratoga in 2020, she's turned into an absolute monster. And I texted Brad about it, and I was saying, what he said to me, I guess I'll probably rest her up this year. And I said, well, look, you could consider seeing if she can stretch out. And he said no, and he was saying, point for the Madison at Keeneland, the grade 1, and then the race, used to be the Humana, I think it's something else on Derby Day, and then the Ballerina is the main goals for her, obviously, towards the Breeders' Cup. But the way she ran in this race, if she can start duplicating that form, given what we've seen, there are a lot of horses who were a world of hurt against her.
Yeah, and I think one thing about the stretch out and distance that's really worked in her favor, just kind of taking a glance at her PPs, is she's been able to use her speed much more effectively, and she's able to get in front of these fields. And it seems like maybe that's the running style that really works best for her, when she can go a bit more of an even pace. Sometimes these horses that are more 7 furlong to a mile types going the shorter distances, it's like they're always playing catch up, trying to get into their preferred running style. And she just kind of hit those fractions pretty evenly, those 23 opening quarters, and she, I think, matched 25 quarters to finish off this race for the penultimate quarter and the final quarter. And she just ran away from this field. I thought the runner-up Bella Vita ran her race as somebody who picked her. I think she ran basically as well as I would have hoped. She was just 9 lengths inferior to the winner, Lady Rocket. It did help that Miss Marissa, who figured to be the other speed, whatever went wrong in her prior race, the turn back alarm apparently was ailing her once again because she just didn't have her typical early speed, and she dropped out of this race basically before they got to the half mile, Paul. So that definitely helped Lady Rocket get into a controlling position on the front end, but doesn't take away from the race that Lady Rocket ran. I mean, we don't see too many fillies and mares running buyers upwards of 105. So definitely an exciting prospect wherever they decide to go next year.
I'm going to guess that was the biggest figure for any filly or mare in America this year.
You might be right.
I feel bad about Miss Marissa because not just I picked her, but I understood she was a bit of a risk off her last race. But also I like her as a horse and like to see Jimmy Ryerson do well with her. But she's whatever it is, she maybe she can't run anymore. Maybe there's something bothering her, but nothing. Lady Rocket. I don't want to knock any of the other horses, but to me the star of the day was Lady Rocket. I was overwhelmed by her, and partly because I didn't trust her going in. And sometimes when horses run like that and you were skeptical, it makes you appreciate them more, I think.
Yeah, it's nice when there's no ambiguity left after the race and you just know you were completely wrong. This horse is much more versatile and has much more capabilities than you foresaw going into the race. Well, that wraps up the 2 graded stakes for the older horses. Let's talk about some of the 2-year-old races, the Remsen and the Demoiselle. Let's begin with the Colts and the Remsen. This was a really exciting matchup, Mo Donegal and Zandon, and they really threw it down on the racetrack. I was saying after the race, it reminded me so much of that Remsen between Honor Code and Cairo Prince when they kind of crawled on the front end, and the two of those, they just sprinted through the stretch and they photoed at the wire. And while obviously these 2 horses haven't accomplished as much coming into this race as Honor Code and Cairo Prince had in that year, I think these are 2 legitimate horses. I know it didn't come back as the fastest race, but I'm always impressed when horses can come home with the kind of closing splits that these 2 did.
Yeah, I agree. I made the same allusion to the Honor Code Cairo Prince race. Cairo Prince, he run maybe one more time and he got hurt or something, or he never came around, but he's done okay as a sire. So, and he was a good horse, and Honor Code, obviously a very good horse. I was very impressed by this. And I think we're looking at 2 legitimate Kentucky Derby type contenders. And let's be honest, other than Jack Christopher, and we have no idea if Jack Christopher, how far he's going to want to go, what's going to happen with him, because we didn't even get to see him in the Breeders' Cup. These horses are right at the top of it for me. I mean, I don't see any horses out there that would, as of yet, besides Jack Christopher, obviously, who has some brilliance, but that scare me compared to them. And I think they both ran very well. I like Mo Donegal a lot. I mean, I think you and I said the same things in his starts, and he's sort of against the track a little bit last time, and he's kind of a goofy horse who's still learning, yet he's still winning. Now, he got an exceptional trip in this race. I saw some gibberish where I lost a length and a half when I had to move outside coming the stretch. Well, I didn't know that he had like a meter that he could get it. It's so exact. It was kind of impressive. But my guess is that I would like every horse I bet on to get the trip that Mo Donegal got, and especially relative to the one Zandon got, who covered like 45 or 46 more feet according to Trackus while he was wide. And so, I'm not saying that Zandon had a terrible trip, but he had a much tougher trip in the winter. I don't think Irad did him any favors with his shenanigans of drifting in. I don't know who told him that your horses run better when you're constantly intimidating other horses, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I think Mo Donegal ran very well. But I do think that Zandon, and I like Mo Donegal here. You like Zandon. I think Zandon comes out of the race the horse that I would want more going forward. 6 furlongs to 9 furlongs, his second start. Mo Donegal had 2 starts. The second one was a mile and 16. So there were a lot of things in his favor. I'm not against either one of those horses, and I won't be surprised when either one of these horses are in the trifecta in the Derby, if not better than that.
Yeah, I think we learned more about Zandon in this race because Mo Donegal, he ran very similar to the way he did breaking his maiden last time. He just ran a slightly faster race, but he showed a lot of the same qualities. Zandon, I mean, we had just seen him run 1 6 furlong race where he did get a good education, but that's a huge stretch out in distance. I mean, I was looking at Chad's stats and Formulator. He's never stretched out a horse like that off a 6 furlong race to go a mile and 1/8. All of his stretch out numbers are just going out to a mile. So very interesting that Chad Brown just made the decision position to run this horse in the race. And I loved that he was able to respond to Mo Donegal's challenge coming to the top of the stretch, because it did look, as you said, like Irad Ortiz had just played his hand perfectly on Mo Donegal. And once he got outside, it seemed like he had all the momentum and was going to go by Zandon. And he actually got about a half length in front of him. But Zandon showed such grit and tenacity to battle back on the inside. And even with all it getting tight at the end, and we could talk about how much ground he was actually cost, was that nose margin defeat going to be reversed if not for the intimidation factor? I mean, putting all of that aside, just from the standpoint of Zandon's performance, I was really impressed that he was able to show that new dimension and that professionalism second time out.
And I also think, much like Todd Pletcher with following C, and saying that he had a certain level of confidence that it wasn't the distance in Haskell and he could get a mile in the Cigar, I think you had to respect that Chad Brown was going 6 furlongs to a mile and eighth, because he's loath to do something like that. And you're never going to see that. And he had missed the Nashua because he had, fortunately, a very, very, minor illness, but nonetheless missed it. And you have to wonder if he'd run in that race as well, maybe he would have won here with that extra. So for him to do it, you knew it was a good sign with this horse, and he was right. This was a terrific race by two. This is going to be, I know a lot of people like to say sort of ignorant things about the Remsen. It's a terrible Derby prep. Well, it hasn't produced a lot of Derby winners lately, though frankly, Normandy Invasion was second and it should have won the Derby. But regardless, that it's produced a lot of Grade 1 winners. We have seen good horses come out of this race, and I think we saw 2 good horses on Saturday.
Yeah, and I mean, the inquiry after the race, I think a lot of people have differing opinions about it. I think my immediate reaction was that it probably didn't change the result, because just kind of watching the head-on in tandem with the pan shot that they were showing on screen immediately after, the trouble and that one real severe push at the end, it happened so close to the wire. I was kind of wondering how much of an impact it really had, but seeing some additional angles afterwards, I mean, it really got tight for Zandon at the end, and almost unnecessarily so when Irad Ortiz just completely shifted his weight into the other horse. You don't want to see that. You want to see both of these horses have a fair chance to the wire, and it just kind of leaves a bad taste in your mouth when you see somebody trying to take that much of an edge.
Yeah, I think that, listen, Irad Ortiz is a great rider. He's won 3 straight Eclipse Awards, and deservedly so. But I think he's starting to wear a lot of us out with his shenanigans on the racetrack. He rides in a manner where he seems to think he owns the racetrack. And to be honest, the stewards have allowed him far too much latitude. And his job is to win races. And he's doing what they're allowing him to do. But when you're somebody that is comfortable straddling that line or walking that thin line, when you go over it even a little bit, I think you lose any right to claim that, well, it got close. No, you made it really close. And then you sort of got over the edge. John Velasquez, who was on Zandon, John is very, very good at more subtly kind of hurting or doing those things. And I don't really remember too many incidents of John Velasquez going over the line. I can remember a lot with Irad, to be honest. And I agree with you. When I first looked at it, and maybe I was a little bit biased because I had picked Mo Donegal, and I thought, and I even said, I think on the air, I could see it going the other way, but if I had to vote, I would vote for it to stay. But like you, the more I looked, the more angles I saw, some of those photos of Irad's arm. I'm talking to Richard Migliori, who I find to be extremely even-handed about these things, and his feelings that it should have been a disqualification. I did change my mind, and I think it'll be interesting to see what happens going forward with this. I'm glad to see the stewards have suspended him 30 days. Obviously, there was that incident on Friday that had more bearing on it as well. But you don't want to see penalties come down after something unfortunate happens. You want to see the penalties come down before something unfortunate happens. So in theory, you can prevent those things from possibly happening in the future.
Yeah, and obviously that incident on Friday kind of colors our opinions about everything that happened on Saturday. And we're referring to, I think it was the fifth or sixth race on Friday, where Irad Ortiz cut over on Omar Moreno Hernandez coming over at the. Basically, I think it was an eighth of a mile into the race, and obviously that horse lost its rider. And great that everyone's okay in the incident, but it was just the kind of recklessness that the stewards really did need to take some action and bring down a punishment. And situations like that, it probably is an error in judgment. It's probably a mistake. I'm sure that there was no malice of intent on the part of Irad Ortiz against the other rider. And, I saw that he and his agent are not going to be appealing this decision. They're going to accept the punishment as it's been handed down from the stewards. That said, when you have something like that happen on Friday, that really does kind of tarnish your reputation in the eyes of a lot of people, because Irad Ortiz is considered by many to be the best rider in the country, the best currently active American rider. And when you see something like that, where you just basically let your guard down and do something that's so careless and reckless, I would imagine that somebody in his position should want to somehow make a correction the next day and ride a clean day on Saturday. And it was almost as if he rode this Remsen like he felt like he had a free pass. Like, whatever happened on Friday, they're not going to suspend me for 60 days based on any, like I could do whatever I want because the punishment's already being handed down. And that was discouraging for me to see, that he rode as aggressively as we've seen from him in all of the weeks prior, the day after something like Friday happened. So I'm happy that the stewards handed down a punishment like 30 days. I know some people were looking for a lot more than that, but in this day and age, I mean, that's kind of the maximum that the stewards are going to give for this kind of infraction. So it's good to see that they're taking some kind of stand.
I agree. And listen, I think you and I both like aggressive riding, but, you have to be responsible. And I think it's very fair to say some things happened that weren't responsible. And Irad is a tremendous rider. And he's a good guy, and I don't, like you say, it's unimaginable to me that he's intentionally trying to hurt somebody. But I think he does need to reflect a little bit on what's going on, that he's riding like this. He shouldn't take away his aggression, but he needs to realize, I don't know. I don't get the hurting in general. I feel like guys feel like they have to do that. I wonder if they just keep a straight path, it would be more beneficial to their horses in the long run anyway.
Yeah, I don't get it either. It's kind of something that's been allowed to happen, and it's spiraled a little bit out of control. Maybe this will rein it in a little bit, but I don't have great hopes for that. At the end of the day, the stewards really do have to take an action if they want to change that, but they haven't expressed really that they do. So we'll see what happens with that in the future. But yeah, I agree with you. I hope that Irad Ortiz does have some time to reflect on this and makes a slight adjustment to the way that he handles himself in some of these races.
And I also hope I don't read any more people, and I'm sure that I will read them, suggesting it's the Ortiz brothers. I don't see any evidence that Jose Ortiz rides in a similar manner. I've never seen it, and I don't see it at all. I don't understand why they're lumped together.
No, you could argue that Jose takes cares not to bull his way out sometimes, like Irad does, and ends up getting himself into trouble. I mean, we see that happen quite a bit. But no, they're both excellent riders. There's just Sure. Yeah, there's that tendency that Irad has to cross the line, and you'd like to see him rein that in. Irad did win 3 graded stakes on Saturday. The other one was the other 2-year-old race, the Demoiselle. This one, just from a quality standpoint, didn't quite live up to the Remsen. I would say these were some very tired 2-year-old fillies coming down the lane. The pace was a bit faster than the Remsen, but they were all kind of bumping off each other in the stretch. I mean, Ness did get up to win this race at the wire, but I wouldn't say that I necessarily have the high hopes for her that I do the 2-year-olds coming out of the Remsen.
Yeah, I definitely had to check my sundial after the race. But what I will say, and I know that you're probably the same look that I did, I recommend to people they go to Trackus and look at the ground loss chart for this race. I don't think you'll see too often a chart that looks like this for the winner, because Ness covered so much more ground than every single horse in this race. And ground loss can be a little deceptive at times, but I don't think there's any argument that Ness was much the best horse in this race. And, maybe with a little less ground loss and situation, maybe her figure, which I think a buyer figure is 75, and I imagine Craig was in the low to mid 90s, maybe that number, could be 5 to 8 points higher. And, she could improve some next year, and she probably does have some real stamina. So I don't think it's out of the realm of possible that she starts to become a better horse next year. But right now, she's taking advantage of circumstance. There's sort of Echo Zulu right now. And I'm not so sure that Shook's horse that won on Friday, Radio Days, yeah, she might be in the conversation with anyone and everyone else for the second best 2-year-old filly out there.
Yeah, I should mention the Demoiselle got a 95 Timeform speed figure, which, as you were saying, it compares very predictably to the 76 buyer. The Remsen got a 104 Timeform speed figure. That number held down a little bit by the slow pace. Craig does not reward dirt horses that come home fast in slow dirt races. But no, I agree with everything you said. Nest was the best horse on this day, despite the neck margin of victory. She did cover more ground than everybody else. I thought the runner-up Venti Valentine ran fine. I thought John Velasquez gave her a great ride, kind of letting the speeds go heading into the first turn, just immediately moving outside to get into the three path, and he gave her that clear, unencumbered run into the race. She was just second best to Nest. Magic Circle, she set the pace, but she just seemed like one that really was gasping at the end of the race. She was kind of veering out in mid-stretch, just seemed like she was dead tired at the end of this. So, I mean, we'll see if some of these gain some added fitness from having gone to go the mile and an eighth, but they're going to have to get a little bit faster to get on par with some of the horses that you mentioned, particularly Echo Zulu, who has a firm grasp on the top of this division right now.
Yeah, Magic Circle, if she's going to have any really effective races, they'll probably be 7 furlongs in that sort of range. And I agree about Venti Valentine. I thought she ran really well in here in the scope of the race. And also, she was a bit intimidated when Magic Circle, sort of came out very quickly, and Manny did a great job of adjusting and getting her straight again. And that inquiry of the Demoiselle. I find it highly unlikely Johnny would have claimed foul if the instant the Remsen hadn't happened a race earlier. Believe me, I get it. Thinking about it, I was thinking if I were Johnny, I'd probably have claimed too. But in that particular case, I think even he knew that there was no chance they were going to adjudicate that foul.
No, in situations like that, I can't blame the rider for just making the stewards look at it, because there was some bumping going on, but I really don't think you could look at that and say that it changed much. They were just all really tired fillies at the end, and they were kind of bouncing off each other. The others that finished behind them, there were a couple of maiden winners coming out of some slower races. They did not really step up. Tap the Faith had a little bit of a trip. I mean, she got steadied early, was a little bit too ranked. She's a horse that's going to have to work out some greenness, but at the end of the day, the horses that were coming out of those maiden wins, her and Nostalgic, they just did not really step forward as some of us would have hoped.
I think one of the more interesting things in racing is, and it's a lot of times a guessing game. You can look at trainer stats, but horses that look good in maidens, that break their maidens first time out, it's a crapshoot when they come back at a stake, and usually they do, these 2-year-olds now. Sometimes they run really well. A lot of times, though, they really take a step back. I don't know why it happens. And listen, Christophe Lamont's a terrific trainer, but it didn't work this case. And, that's something that come up with the Steve Ashton barn, where he didn't have these good numbers often. And that was one of my concerns with Echo Zulu. They gave her a lot of time. But, she came and, she's run nothing but 90-plus buyers. But sometimes they just don't run that well in their second start. And I think you like Tap the Faith, and I know, and I thought she ran well enough. You liked her a little more than I did, but I didn't disagree with you. Let's see her third start. If she stinks in her third start, then okay. Well, but I'm willing to give her at least a pass for now.
Now, before we wrap up, I just want to mention a couple more races from the undercard and Cigar Mile Day. You always talk about how we typically see some impressive maiden winners on the day, though that usually takes place in the dirt races. I would say the most impressive 2-year-old maiden winner, though, coming out of Saturday is clearly Market Segmentation, who actually won her debut on the turf, going the 2-turn mile on the 16th. I mean, a very impressive turn of foot from this daughter of American Pharoah.
Yeah, I think she got like a 78 buyer, and that's comparable to the Breeders' Cup juvenile turf, Philly turf, right? Which got a 79, I think. So, I mean, I know she got a good trip in there, but she really accelerated once Irad got her clear. And, a Chad Brown-Klarovich turf first-time star at 8-1 that gallops. You don't really see that often. Though when Annals of Time won on Cigar Mile Day, he got paid like $10 or $11. Now he was running against Inspector Lindley, who would, run a huge race for Shug the race before that. And he's a stakes horse as well, not as good, obviously, as Annals turned out to be. But yeah, I agree. Market Segmentation looked good. She really spread that field out.
Yeah, that was the field that appeared to have some quality going in among those that had already run. So it was encouraging to see a first-time starter win it, and win it so decisively. I mean, she drew off by over 2 lengths in the end and did show that impressive turn of foot coming off the far turn. Like you said, a good trip, but she really showed up and seems like a talented filly for Chad Brown. Not a ton of dam side pedigree for her, but the American Pharaohs, some of them have turned out to be nice turf horses, and she definitely seems like she's in that mold. The third-place finisher, Wallachia, definitely ran well after hopping up at the start. She was very far back in the early going and made a good late run to get up for third. She's one that I would look for probably at Gulfstream for Graham Motion, because she seems like a horse with talent.
I agree with that. It'll be interesting to see. I think you may see a little bit some better horses in some of the, you see Chad Brown and Christophe Clement and Graham Motion shipping some good turf horses to Tampa. I think the plan at Gulfstream is to run the lower level races on the synthetic surface and use the turf for maiden specials, allowance, stake races. So maybe that'll upgrade the quality we'll see from some of those trainers. Might be more inclined to give a Gulfstream turf course a chance. We'll see.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I know it's going to be kind of a new situation at Gulfstream this winter. Hopefully they keep that turf course in better condition, and some of those trainers who really are looking to get their horses on turf over the winter will have that as an option to run over it. The other maiden race early in the day on Saturday, I should say, it just really did not produce a particularly compelling performance. Script won it for Graham Motion, but there were some scratches from the race. Nobody really stepped forward. The firsters didn't turn out to be that good. Just an unusually slow race for that level. I mean, the other race that I think we should mention from Saturday's card was Scuttlebuzz winning that allowance race early in the day, getting a 95 buyer. I mean, just a cool horse that I think is worth mentioning. I think this was his 5th turf victory in 2021. I mean, just really cool to see a horse win that many times on the New York circuit. And he is such a specialist. He loves this 6 furlong distance. I think he's now run it 8 times in his career with 6 wins in 2 seconds. I mean, Rudy's done a great job with this horse.
I also want to say this was an optional claimer non-winners of 2, right?
Yeah, I think so.
He's a New York bred that ran through his conditions and then won the non-winners of 1 and non-winners of 2 turf sprints in succession. Yeah. And I don't think he did it taking advantage of, bad horses showing up in turf sprints late in the year. If anything, the argument might be the other way around. Those races sometimes get tougher. And he's an unusual horse. And he's a real true talented turf sprinter. And he doesn't need a fast pace. He closes sometimes into moderate paces. And now he got a fast pace in this race. He got a very good setup here, but he has won races or been effective in races when he hasn't had everything fall in his lap. I agree. I mean, it's very hard not to be a fan of Scuttlebuzz. Scuttlebuzz is kind of horse. If we gave awards out for sort of the coolest horses and different things during the year, he would be a contender. He should get an award as was there a top New York bred turf sprinter, in the stakes that you can think of? Because if not, he should get an award as the top New York bred turf sprinter of the year. I don't think they give one, but they should.
No, this year I can't think of one. I mean, I remember a horse like, I think, Sandy Slew, who was a New York bred, who won some open company stakes a few years ago. But no, I mean, typically you don't see that. And they don't really run New York bred turf sprint stakes races. So no, so he would have to travel out into open company to run in some stakes next year. But I mean, I think he started out his career with Jonathan Thomas. You don't often see turf horses going from Jonathan Thomas to Rudy Rodriguez, really fulfilling their potential in the latter barn. Rudy's done a great job with this horse, and it's so cool to see him really excelling at the end of the season.
And he's going to have to run in stakes at this point. What's he got left? He's either going to claim races or in stakes. So Rudy's going to have to make a decision, because there's nothing left. I mean, on all conditions.
No, I assume they'll put him away for the winter and bring him back next year, and they'll explore their options to see if he's still as good as he was at the end of his season. Well, Andy, that's it for the Cigar Mile Day recap. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast to talk about this. It was a fun day of racing, the final day of Grade 1 racing in New York of the year. I know that you're going to be off for the next few weeks, but you'll be back, I think, after the holiday break, correct?
Yeah, I'll be back on Thursday, December 30th, probably around then. I'll be watching the races. I'll be around, but I won't be at the show.
We look forward to that. I know there's not a ton of graded stakes coming up in the New York area, but there's some good racing during the winter at Aqueduct, so pay attention over the upcoming weeks. They will be starting their winter meet this upcoming Thursday.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
All right. Thanks for coming on, Andy. Remember, you can always listen to these podcasts on DRF.com, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel. As I said at the top of the show, Craig will be back for one more podcast this Friday, so stay tuned for that TimeformUS forecast coming up this Friday. Thanks for tuning in this week.